Welcome to VoiceBox After Hours.
Welcome back to another episode of VoiceBox After Hours. I am Sophie, head of VoiceBox Multimedia, and I am joined today with Jacob, our in-house audio description writer. Lots of clients listening will have had Jacob's beautiful writing come through to them for projects, and the majority of you who are less able to see will have heard Jacob's scripts on television, adverts, series, etc. Jacob, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me
here. You're very welcome. I usually start with an audio description, but as we have the expert penmanship of yourself, I thought you might like to give our description as what we look like for any listeners who are less able to see us, or if they're listening on Spotify.
Okay. On the split screen of a podcast recording app, the interviewer, a woman with long black hair and glasses, wearing a white t-shirt and dungarees, is on the right. And the interviewee, a man with fair hair and a checked shirt, is on the left.
You didn't hype me up. Well, you didn't hype me up quite as much as I had hoped. But, my audio descriptions.
I actually didn't.
My audio descriptions are something else.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure. I suppose my interpretation was that it wasn't. No, not that it was inappropriate, but I didn't really. I thought it best to just stay fairly neutral.
I think if I were to write it, I would be like devastatingly beautiful young woman in her late teens.
Well, obviously sometimes it's necessary. The audience needs to know that that is the intention. Yeah,
exactly this. And I think that's a really good starting point. How important do you find it? And we'll move on to timings after this. But how important do you deem it to be for your audience members when you're writing a script when it comes to image description? If you were to remove timings completely and you weren't constricted to kind of 3 to 5 to 10 second gaps, how much detail do you think is enough, and how much do you think is relevant? Does it matter on the content of the we'll just say program for argument's sake? Do you think it's relevant to the content of the program?
Well, obviously, it's really hard to think of audio description and not think of time limitations. Of course, there you use the example of 3 seconds, 5 seconds, and 10 seconds. But for a program, it's going to be an hour in length, and so it needs to remain an hour, even if it's extended. It can't be. It can't be too long. But I mean, even if you're writing a book or a radio show, there's always that element of how much description should we give, and many readers will be fans of really descriptive writing, and some readers won't be. So it's really a question of thinking about if it's a TV program, what are the producers of the TV program? What's their intention, and how important is the setting? And if you're watching a TV program and there's a minute of looking at, let's say it's like a snowy mountain scene, and there's somebody in a cave, and you see all the mountains and the trees, and you get the impression that they really want the viewer in this case to feel immersed in that world, then it probably is quite important. But then you also have to think about music. The first time I ever spoke to somebody for advice on audio description, he said that it's quite frustrating when the script runs over music, because a lot of the time that adds to things. So there are it's really hard. I find any question on audio description quite hard to answer, because there are so many moving parts that you have to consider when writing.
Yeah. I feel, and having worked on a lot of adverts as well, where we've got a 30-second TV slot, Mo and I have worked on several adverts where the music sets the ambience or the atmosphere. And then when we've moved into kind of programs and series where it's quite scary, I feel like when the AD overruns the kind of creepy music that sets the scene, there's really got to be a balance of talking just to fill a gap, but also being as informative, but not taking away from the essence of what the creative directors have intended. And I think when, again, with time limitations, you really are restricted. But it must be difficult to fill in, to kind of to have that balance, to create the ambience and the atmosphere in the same way of not taking away from a blind
Completely.
audience.
When I first started doing audio description, of course, you want to consult a style guide that will tell you exactly how to do everything, but you soon realize that it's really hard to when beginning to know exactly what to say and when to say it. Initially I wanted to have some kind of hierarchy of rules, and I suppose I still would. I mean, I wouldn't have one written down that I would consult, but in my head, you think, well, don't put audio description over dialogue. That's obviously a massive no-no, and then so on down the list. And so let's say that's rule number one. It's okay then to violate rule number two in order to satisfy rule number one. But then you can imagine there's a program where it's a minute and there are literally no gaps whatsoever. But for some reason, you might have to include audio description at some point. So then you're going to have to violate that rule of, putting it over. So there's always, always something that you're going to have to, like, especially with the adverts, because it's so short, like you can't include everything. So you have to just think about, like you said, what's essential, particularly for adverts. What's the message of the advert? Yeah.
I think we found this when Mo and I did some work for quite a high brow makeup brand, where we legally had to read the terms and conditions because it would kind of fell into pharmaceutical. But at the same time, and it wasn't for the UK, but at the same time, we're sort of limited. And we just, in the end, the client was like, we just need the logo reading out. The most important thing is the product name and the logo. And I think sometimes, especially, we do an awful lot of adverts, and I kind of feel that that's become paramount for a lot of companies, is that it's not, for a lot of companies, it's not the audio description, let's describe the product for a blind audience. It's become, let's just get our name out there for a household brand. And I kind of feel like there's a crossover between the need and want for accessibility versus selling products. Now, obviously, the way that we canvas audio description to clients is that you don't want to cut out chunks of your audience just because they can't see. But at the same time, make it relevant. We've done it with flavored snacks where the flavor of the snack hasn't been described, but really it should have been. But at the end, we've just named the product. And I kind of feel that's not the best balance, because we want blind people to watch the video in their minds versus just being sold a product as an afterthought. Let's just get more money and let's just name the product. So when they're out shopping, they know what to choose, versus taking away the description and the creativity from the video. But again, it comes down to time constraints. And I think a lot of it can be content-based. When we've done work with the Paralympics, it has been relevant that someone's only had one arm or one leg or is in a wheelchair. Really important to describe that. Whereas if there's an amputee describing reading the news, for example, it's not really relevant that they're an amputee.
Yeah.
That's just how they are, because the actual description really needs to be about the news. Where do you find personally the balance to say the race, gender, disability isn't important in this particular? Where does that balance come in? Is it content based? Is it really relevant? Yeah,
well, like you said, I mean, sometimes at an advert you might literally all you get time for at the end is to say the name of the product. So then the way I'll do it is I'll look at the slots that I can fit audio description into, and then I'll just really try and think about what are the most important things. I'll move on to, let's say, race or gender afterwards. But a good example of where you're looking of where you have to make sacrifices was an advert we did recently for Hellmann's mayonnaise, and it was a recreation of the scene from Harry Met Sally in a diner. That I'll have what she's having scene. Of course, if you know the film, you'll be familiar with the scene, and you would have the two actors in the original film at the start having a sandwich, and I can't remember exactly how long I had to describe it, but let's say it's 3 seconds, and what's important here is you have the two actors having sandwiches, and typically you'd say, well, the most important thing is there are two people eating sandwiches, but actually I thought in this case it is essential that you name the actors, because in order for a blind audience to understand the context, it's essential. Yeah,
The joke,
exactly.
the very famous cup of coffee.
They need to know that it's.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Billy Crystal, I think, and Meg Ryan. Yeah, but I think it's Billy. I might be wrong. Billy Crystal, Meg Ryan.
Almost a parody,
Exactly, yeah.
wasn't it?
But if you had anybody else, it wouldn't work. So in that case, I mean, some people won't be familiar with the film, and equally for any non-visually impaired viewer.
The Gen Zs are probably very confused. I know when it hit the Super Bowl, there was a lot of
Exactly, yeah.
about it,
but I mean, I suppose it's not necessarily for them. And in the same way, if you have a blind audience, and then it's a young blind person who's unfamiliar, then they're going to have the same issues that the non-visually impaired audience will have. But you want to give the blind audience everything that you've given other viewers in order to understand the joke. And so if it were race or gender, for example, then again, you have to decide whether the race and gender is absolutely essential here. And of course, sometimes it will be. So that's one of those times you have a bit of a push and pull, and you have to decide. Ideally, you get everything in, and that's what you try to do. You try to be economical with your words. But when it's not possible, decide what you think is most important. And actually, with adverts, the adverts are 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and they try and pack a lot in. So it's hard to get exact everything they want included.
Absolutely. And I think with the Hellmann's ad in particular, Unilever are really advertising at millennials who do the household shop. So for millennials and Gen X and boomers, we do the household shops more so than Gen Z, who, which there would be a selection of the older Gen Zs, but the majority are at university and younger. That it was really aimed at us who would have seen the original film, and kind of the context would have made sense whether you were blind or otherwise, because it was of I say our time, I'm older than you, of my time, then that would make perfect sense. So I think, definitely a really good example versus anything else. And I think some of the other ads that Mo and I have done, and I'm not going to name names with this, but have been female-based adverts aimed at females for females. And I think where age comes into it is where we've done face cream adverts, where we've had to be so sensitive to a model on screen, but they're selling anti-aging cream, for example, and the model may be 55 plus. And it's sometimes not very nice, especially with women, that we discuss women's ages, but who would be selling a face cream to a 19-year-old. So I think sometimes we've, because obviously for anyone who's listening, the work process is that Mo and I originally assess the videos, and then we pass on a brief of what we think is important and not important. And then Jacob will work to that brief as well as give his own feedback as to where he thinks things could be different. But I think with race, and I look at adolescence, which is obviously the hot topic on Netflix at the moment, and really interesting where we talk about race with the young boy, because it's been all over.
I have, but I haven't read about any, I don't know what people are saying in the news necessarily.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of differently politically minded people, shall we say, who have said, this doesn't make sense. Like, a white person would never stab a girl. Like, why has he been cast white? He should have been black, because statistically, and suddenly you enter into this. And of course, the whole point is not the program for me was not about the boy killing the girl. It was about the misogyny and the social media feeding into a young boy's psyche, regardless of his race. Because this wasn't about gang crime or anything that could be relative to statistics. It was talking about the misogyny of a young child sort of being groomed, if you like, off the internet. And there's been a huge uproar about the fact that the white boy was cast over a black boy, rightly or wrongly. But very interesting. I found the whole thing was a bit of a mix-up, having the lead police detective as a black man, and then the second in command as a woman, and everyone forgot her name, or she wasn't introduced. There were so many parts of it that the audio description side of it really had to play into what the film was about. And I've not listened to the audio description. I've only read about other people who have. But I think I might very well rewatch it with the audio description on. and just see how an audio describer might have taken that in. Because if you were going in watching it for the first or second time, which, bearing in mind, again, for listeners, we often get series, weeks or months before they hit the television. There's not discussion around it on social media. When we're writing about these things, they've not been aired yet. So by the time they go onto television, we've done it 3 months prior. So I kind of feel like we don't always get the bigger discussion or the think tanks or the, context around it. Sometimes you have to go in, forgive the pun, blind, and write the audio description how you see fit. And then maybe the kind of outside issues are discussed a bit later on, and then maybe kick yourself going, well, I described him as white, but maybe that wasn't the point, and maybe I shouldn't have done. I don't know how that plays into you, when you're going into these without having any sort of surrounding issues.
Well, one of the examples you used, actually, because I remember the scene when the two police officers are in the school, and one of the teachers forgets the female police officer's name. And of course, you have that, there's that, as you alluded to, the subtext there. There is, when I can't remember which writer it was who said, once a joke is described, it's no longer funny. But this isn't a joke, but the nuance that people, it's not explained to anybody who's not visually impaired. And sometimes as well, it can be interpreted multiple ways. So I think when if you are doing the audio description, you don't want to, if possible, like tell the blind audience exactly what they're going for. In the same way, when we're talking about the Harry Met Sally scene, you want to give them what people who can see the scene unfold. You want to give the blind audience what they have. So it's hard to say, really, that, because you can imagine she forgets her name and you start explaining, oh, she's only forgotten her name because she's a woman or something. I don't think you want to do something like that. So sometimes I'll find it very difficult to get all those kind of nuances into the audio description.
And I think you're right. I think sometimes you might over-explain, which really prevents the point of the film playing out. Because another thing that I read was the young girl who was the best friend of the girl who died, the black girl, also forgot the teacher's name because she called her Miss Lower School or Miss, Year 7 or whatever she called her. She didn't call her by her name. And I often wonder, because with audio description, it's not your job to explain what the director may or may not have been thinking, which could be very subjective. Everyone who's watched Adolescence has taken something away from it differently. So I guess it's not really, and there's such a fine line between being factual and unbiased, i.e. explaining what's on screen. But much like our original intros, how you might describe what I look like and how I might describe what I look like are very, very subjective to the writer. So I think there really does have to be a balance of how factual do you need to be, i.e. there is a man and a woman on screen, he's black, she's white, and she's only got one arm and he's in his 40s, but we don't describe her age. I just wonder how the balance really must play into you, especially when you're like really restricted on time. I think people think audio description is a really easy thing to do. You just write what you see on screen, but there really is so much more into it where you don't want to be too obvious and you don't want to be explaining the concept of the film, excuse me, because your job is to explain what you see on screen, but there really has to be a limit as to what. Yeah,
when I first started, I thought it would be impossible to do, a 30-second advert in less than about 40 minutes. I really, with all things, once you get experienced, you start to get better, and that means getting faster. But I think when I first started doing the adverts in particular, it made me realize how I don't really pay attention to a lot of adverts. I don't really get what they're going for. I think one of the early adverts I did was for ice cream, and it was like it started in black and white, and then the sun comes out, and that's when everyone starts eating the ice cream. And when I just first watched it, I thought, I really didn't get that, and it demands that you think about what somebody's going for. I mean,
actually happened. And what's so beautiful about what you've just said is that that particular advert, and again, I'm not going to name the brand, I watched it, obviously, before it got handed over to you. And my initial reaction was, Mo, this is amazing. There's no dialogue. Think of all the audio description we can fit in because it's just music. And I was really over the moon that there was no chit chat in it because I was like, yes, we can fit loads of AD in this. But of course, the point is not just to fill up the 30 seconds with AD because you want the advert music in particular for that particular advert to play out. And it was quite a soft music, and it was a very artistic advert. It was filmed very well. But yeah, my initial reaction to yours was, yippee, like there's no dialogue. This is great. Whereas your initial reaction was, I don't really fully understand what's going on. And what's really funny about the advert is that if I were to watch it and have to write an AD script for it, I don't think it would make much sense to a blind audience member, because I feel like the advert was quite obscure for ice cream. It wasn't obscure, creative wise, it was beautiful. It was a work of art, but it was one of those adverts where you kind of get to the end and you were like, that was really nothing to do with the product. But sometimes I wonder if I'd been blind and just heard the AD of that particular advert, I may not have fully really understood the point.
Well, it was also on the audio description, before I forget, there was a lot of stills that were, you'd go through in 2 seconds, you'd go through about 6 or 7 stills. And of course, you can't describe every single one. So you have to think about, how am I going to describe, these? I mean, it was really like a woman in a bathroom, then a woman on a balcony, and then, her coffee table and another part of her flat. So you have to think, yes, okay, there's no way you can describe all of these. So what's the best way?
And the architecture, I've got a feeling it was filmed in Bath.
Yeah, exactly.
But the architecture was incredible. Trying to fit that in as well.
But I was quickly going to say, it wasn't so much an assessment of the advert. It just makes you realize that I'm not really tuning in to what these, what the producers are going for sometimes. And that could just be a lot of the time, I'm sure people who make adverts are aware that when the program ends, a lot of people are not, going to watch every single one intently, but the same thing would be true of a program like going back to adolescence. I watched another series recently called Severance on Apple TV, and Severance is
oh yeah I've not seen it.
I really enjoyed it, and there are a lot of Easter eggs in Severance. It's a series where you think like, oh, pause that. What did that say at the bottom of the screen, or what's the purpose of the balloons here? Right. And so there are really quite a lot of moving parts in that series, and in order to get everything would be difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I know that I've not worked with you, but I have worked with other people. How might you find there's not much script writing goes on in live audio description? So what we find is that sometimes in theatres, football matches, things that are happening live, we have been asked, we have done live AD for the Belfast International Arts Festival, which has always been great. And we've had to do live AD. So whilst we've had an idea of what's coming, the Belfast International Arts Festival in particular was like a beautiful array of singers and choirs and artwork and lots of kind of, is it rhythmic gymnastics? Yeah. Like lots of like ribbons and curtain work, and it's beautiful. And we had to do some live audio description for that, which was cool, really cool. But it wasn't script based because it was live. There was no way of working out timings. And so we did use a voiceover actor that we've used for lots of other live AD work, who can kind of think on their feet. Do you think there may be a time what's the best way to do that? Because when it's live, obviously there's never going to be a time where we're going to be able to have more prep work. Is there bullet points that you would suggest somebody follows for live AD? So, background, most important, music, or visual cues as a second importance. Is there kind of like a bullet point list that you would suggest for a VO who would be doing it live?
Well, the example you gave of gymnastic type things, I suppose that's quite similar to sport commentary on the radio. And I don't know that much about it, but I get the impression that commentators, they'll do their work. So if it's a football match, they'll have a lot of things written down in front of them.
Yeah.
But otherwise, when it comes to describing the action, like as long as they know the players, I think that would be just make sure you know, all the characters.
This always, yeah. So I'm not a football fan, but my other half is a big Aston Villa supporter, and he does force me to watch the football. And I'm not. I'm more of a rugby fan. I don't mind watching football. Hadn't actually watched a football match about 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm on board with it. I find watching football quite cool, and it always blows my mind when I listen to the commentators. And I'm like, how do they know where all the players are? Because I can barely see them. But like, if I haven't got my glasses on either, I'm just like, squinting. Or if they're in an away kit, like I've got no idea who's who. And it does blow my mind that they have to know not only the players of one team, but both teams, of all teams at all times, including the ref, the substitutes. And I'm just like, how do you know all of this to kind of just reel it off? Because it is a form of live AD. They are literally describing what's happening on screen live, and it's very fast paced. And I just think that's incredible when it's off script. Like, that's a skill.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for many of them, they've done it for decades. So in terms of having to do their background research, unless it's an FA Cup tie and you have a team, a non-league team playing, they'll know all the players. And I don't know, we'll just be really comfortable with speaking off the cuff. But with something like, if it's a play, I think that the script would have to be written beforehand, and whoever was going to do the live audio description would probably, I would imagine, I've not done it before, but I'd imagine they would need to rehearse with the theatre group, and probably also liaise with the director and maybe also ask them.
Likes the music.
But in terms of
interesting.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of bullet points and kind of having that hierarchy of rules, it was something that I really craved at the beginning, but I would probably avoid now. I think, with the experience, your intuition just develops, and your understanding of what's important and when to do it just gets better. I wouldn't know for live audio description, but I would imagine those same kind of lessons that you learn for any other audio description would come into play.
I mean, I think the point of football commentary was never for blind audience members.
But on the radio, sorry, just to clarify,
it was never designed.
I was thinking about radio.
Yeah. But I kind of feel like that was just for people listening versus, people who are actively blind. Because a couple of the nuances are forgotten. I never hear if the ref is male or female. I assume male, because I assume that male football, but sometimes refs are female. Lines, I hate the word linesman, lines people, often female, never mentioned. Aston Villa in particular, lots of non-white players. And I only mention Aston Villa because that's who I'm forced to watch, but never described. So I'm not necessarily convinced that the commentary is for blind people. But then I also kind of think it's probably not relevant. Does it matter if that particular footballer, number 7, is black? Does it matter if one of the lines people is a woman? I don't think it's relevant to the content. Versus kind of being.
I think that's actually it's quite a good example of not just what's relevant, but who's your audience. So if you're producing, there would be commentary for if you think of a sport at the Olympics that you've never seen before, and you kind of, if you're commentating, nobody watches this, but this is a more of a fringe sport. Like when I was watching the skateboarding. When they describe the tricks and what people are doing, it often comes with a further explanation, with a clarification of, this is what's going on, because they recognize that the audience for skateboarding or for fencing or something else, these are people who will only ever watch at the Olympics. Whereas if you're watching to stay on skateboarding, if you're watching the X Games, to watch the X Games, that the assumption is that you know who these people are, you know what these tricks are. And so your commentary or your audio description is then catered for this audience. So it's another time where you think, not just what's relevant, but what can I assume that these people already know?
Do you think there is a fine line, some political red tape of describing genders and races where they may not be relevant to the content? Do you think it's important? So let's say we're doing an advert, again, naming no brand names, of shower gel. Do you think it's important that you describe the person using the shower gel as, I guess, a female, if it's a female-based shower gel, Do you think the race is important there?
I did an advert not for shower gel but for skincare, and the idea of that particular skincare product was that it was for all types of skin, and so it was. So you did have older women. I think it was all women on the advert, but older women.
This was an inclusivity.
Yeah, and so you'd have black women, Asian women, and so in that case, yeah, if possible,
women,
if you have the room, then I think get that in. But otherwise, it's hard to say because, of course, the selection process to choose a cast of people who are lots of different genders, ages, and races. You've done it to be inclusive, but the purpose isn't necessarily to be inclusive. It's like, let's say you have a new generation of children coming up, and you want to show them that in football, women can be linesmen, linespeople, and referees, and in adverts, this is for you. You want to get used to seeing people of different races and people of different genders, just doing things, but not in a way that says, "Wow, look, we have all these different people." Yeah, so in that case, absolutely. It's like, but then if you're doing the audio description and you point it out, you are kind of you are drawing attention to it. When, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not the purpose. The purpose is that it is not the purpose.
There's a really good example of this. So we did an advert, again, no names named, for a snack brand, and we wrote the AD script and returned it. And the client said to us, "Oh, but there's a black woman in the advert," and there was probably about 25 white people, and it was based in an office. And they said, "But you've not mentioned that the woman's black." And I said, "Yeah, because we didn't mention that the other 25 people were white." I don't think now the product and the company are not specific to black people. Now, if we were selling a hair product for Afro hair, for example, absolutely relevant that you mentioned the type of hair and person that's aimed at. However, this was not. This was a very generic food product that pretty much everyone would have in the household, white, black, Asian, otherwise. And they said, "But we need to mention that she's black." And I said, "Well, we'd have to mention that everyone else is white because she's not relevant to the product that she's black." I know, but for diversity and inclusion, it's really important that we mention that we've got non-white people in here. And I kind of took a step back and I thought, do you really want your customer base to know, or you bring attention to the fact that you've only put one black woman in out of 25 other people, just to tick a box effectively? Do you want to draw attention to that? Because now, having watched the advert, I paid no attention if she was black or white, or because everyone was eating the snack. I really didn't care. I just didn't, it wasn't relevant to the product. Therefore, my eye was not drawn to the fact that she was black. So I kind of feel like sometimes drawing the attention to the fact that you've put in a token minority is not always in the best favor. Now, the company thought it was, and we did advise against it, and the company took our advice, thankfully, because I just think sometimes, especially in cancel culture, the backlash would have been ridiculous because we don't need to mention.
Yeah, no, exactly. I completely agree that it's different when you're describing it and you draw attention to something that's not supposed to have attention drawn to it. It's just supposed to be. If it's supposed to be normal, and then you highlight it, then it does come. It can come across as as
another agenda,
and it doesn't work for certain descriptions. And I think any conversation, all the conversations we've had, and that anybody has about audio description will come down to that relevance and the message you want to put across. But yeah.
I think my last question for you, Jacob, is there a type of AD that you loathe versus love? Are the 30-second adverts hell compared to a 30-minute episode versus a 90-minute film? Is there a type of AD where you're like, oh God, I really don't want to do this? And there's some AD like, oh, this is great, I can churn this out on my lunch break. How does it
well, when I first started getting into multimedia work, it was subtitles. And the thing I used to think I would get excited about would be a film or a documentary that I was really interested in. But then you find
until you're 20 minutes in, then you want to kill yourself, because that's how I
exactly.
feel.
You think, oh, I'm really interested in this. And for subtitles in particular, if there's really fast dialogue and people are talking over each other all the time, and you're kind of thinking, how am I going to deal with this? Where I get within the character limitations for each line, and it gets really difficult. And then you're spending about half an hour on a single minute or 2 minutes. Those are not fun. And it's the same. I would say it's the same with audio description. You could have, you want it to be engaging, and you want to be able to think about it. But when it's really difficult and time consuming, it's obviously we all have different projects that we need to do every day. And if something is really taking a lot longer than you thought it would take, then even if you were interested, then that becomes, an unpleasant job to do. If you had all the time in the world, they'd all be, in theory, quite fun to do. So no, I wouldn't have, a type of AD that I don't like doing. I did, there was some, maybe like a 20-minute documentary is nice. If an hour and a half film could be, if you're just anything that you're working on for a really long time, you kind of, it's not so much that it gets boring, but like you've already seen it, you already know what happens, and you kind of want to be all right on to the next one. And 20 minutes is a nice length, I find.
I think that with Mo and I, again, when we did a lot of testing work before securing large contracts, we watched the same 20-second advert probably about 55,000 times over. And then we submit the work, everything's beautiful. And then I'll be in the cinema 6 weeks later, 2 months later, and the bloody thing comes on and it's on social media. And then because my phone's heard it, it starts playing it on every app possible. And there's just no escaping the music, the wording. I mean, I kind of feel there's probably a good campaign that for some of our clients, I'm probably the biggest purchaser because I'm so influenced by the adverts, having worked on it. I know them all word for word. I know the adverts I don't like. I know what the reaction of the audience is going to be before it comes out, because I just know, God, that's really annoying. Oh, that's brilliant. That's such a good piece of music. And sometimes I'll hear a song on the radio and I know for a fact it's come from an advert, and I'll be able to tell you what the product is instantly, but I'll have to turn it off because I'm done. I can't listen to it again. And subtitling is the same. You listen to the same 1 minute of dialogue literally hundreds of times over, or when you've got a mishear, that's the worst thing. You can't quite hear what someone's saying and you keep replaying it and it sounds like 8 different things. Horrific. I think that's probably the worst part of the job is the over.
Yeah, it's not understanding what's being said for subtitles is that can be horrible. Yeah, because a lot of the time, if you don't have the context and somebody says, they have, you might understand what they say as a certain, let's say it's a short phrase. You might understand 2 words that are different from the 2 words I understand, and you think, well, actually, he didn't really say either of these. He obviously, he made these sounds, and this was your interpretation of the sounds based on no context, and this was mine, and so, in that way, in that case, hopefully, you can go to the client and say, what did this person say? Yeah.
And a fresh pair of ears really does change that. I know that Mo always puts into our group chat, guys, anyone listens from 15 to 18 seconds? What's he saying? And all of us will have a completely different response. Or sometimes I'll be subtitling and I'll shout my other half and I'll be, listen to this, tell me what he's saying, because I think the fresh pair of ears, he might hear something completely different to me. And I'll be like, play it again, and just hear the same word. And, it's funny. And I suppose AD is not any different. Everyone comes back with something else because we're completely taking things in differently. But that's definitely the worst part of the job, is just overplaying and overhearing.
One thing that can really affect you with subtitles is if you're going over subtitles that somebody's already written, and you're reading them at the same time you're listening. It really affects what you hear. So that can be an issue.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. It's a bit like when you see those videos and it'll say whatever word you're reading is the word you can hear. And it's so true. And I think it's the same with subtitles. And then there's examples where I've watched it on TV and I've seen something subtitled that they absolutely haven't said. And my other half's gone, oh, well, they didn't even say that. And I'll say, don't judge until you've listened to the same bit of dialogue 55,000 times over. That's probably the best they could come up with. They probably just thought, it, this is going to have to do. This sounds, and I just think after listening to it for a lot, that's probably what it sounds like to them. It's when you write a word down or you read a word so many times, it almost doesn't make sense to you anymore. I think your hearing eventually comes like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Distorted. We're making it up. Jacob, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time to enlighten me a little bit on the work you do, even though, we work at the same place. It's always interesting to know the grief that projects give you. Any parting words for any aspiring AD writers or people looking to get into the industry?
Well, the way I started was find what you can online. And I was lucky enough that my girlfriend's old boss, who she's still good friends with, is blind. So I could call him and have a long conversation. And everything that I'd thought from, my early experience, I could ask him, what do you think about all this? And maybe be corrected where wrong. But also, if you're somebody who can see and you're describing things for people who can't see, it's nice to be told that what you think, what you're saying, yeah, this is correct, this is fine, because then it gives you confidence. Because otherwise, you can spend a lot of time just kind of going back over something. Yeah, thinking like, am I doing this right? So yeah, find resources you can find online, seek people out. But I would also, where style guides are available, consult them, but understand that sometimes you're going to have to violate certain rules in order to satisfy others. Like with subtitling, it might say don't separate an article from a noun, or a noun from a verb, or an object from a verb. And it's like, you'll have cases where you have to do that sometimes. And so if you kind of if everything the style guide says is gospel, then it can be really hard to get over it. So, but and very true for audio description. Like, two audio describers are never going to produce the exact same script, even for something that's small. So, it's quite subjective. Just practice, get more experience, and getting client feedback is a really good thing to learn as well. And I don't necessarily mean this was good or this was bad, but it's really helpful when a client will come back with a suggestion, and sometimes it is something you've missed and it's an improvement. Other times you might have to explain, well, this is why I did it, and they might hear the argument and say, yeah, I agree with that. Actually, that works well. So just talking to other people, and exactly,
finding out what works. Yeah, super.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacob.
And you too.
Have the best day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.